U2 recorded and released a pivotal album in 1991 called Achtung Baby. The word pivotal is often used to is associated with that record because it came at a time when U2 was at a crossroads. The band had achieved an overwhelming amount of fame following the Joshua Tree, but then their next album, Rattle and Hum, had, mixed reviews at best from the critics, and so the band decided it was time to regroup. And they hoped to find a new direction at the Hansa Studios in Berlin, where a couple of their favorite David Bowie albums had been produced. But the inspiration came slowly, tensions rose, and U2 came close to breaking up. So the story goes. Achtung Baby is one of 5 albums that I'll be discussing with the legendary producer Daniel Lanois, who'll be inducted into the Canadian Music Industry Hall of Fame this week. And it's my pleasure to welcome him back into the studio here.
Nice to be here.
So take me back to those early days with U2 in Berlin. When you first went into the studio, what was the headspace of the band at the time?
Oh, the headspace of the band was terrific. Everybody was excited to be in that environment, where a lot of classics had been recorded. In fact, Eno himself had been in that very room with Bowie and, Iggy Pop back in the 70s.
For Low. Was it Low?
For Low, I think so, yeah. And I think they're all hanging out together. They're all art buffs, so
right,
music aside, they really know their history on art. So right. I think it was a great collision of characters. But we were happy to be there, excited. Bono wanted to make a rock and roll record, but a European rock and roll record. And that was the crossroads we chose.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, maybe this is just the stuff of folklore and rock and roll tabloids, but there's been stories about tensions between bandmates. I mean, did you have any sense of anything like that going on?
I'm sorry to not be supporting the National Enquirer part of things here,
right.
But listen, man, when I go in the studio, head down, get the job done, be creative, support the house philosophy, obey the house rules, deliver a masterpiece, and get on with your life.
Right.
So I try not to get involved in too much dirt. I don't remember it being any easier or any harder than any other U2 record we worked on. Mm-hmm. What was different about it was we were determined to mix flesh and machine. U2 have made plenty of recordings where it's just a band in the room and only flesh. Like Pride in the Name of Love would be an example of one that just came off of the floor. Yeah. And it was a raw performance, and the tempos rise up and down, and when Larry does that slingshot roll into the chorus, it definitely backs off about 8 BPM and then comes back up. You get that kind of ebb and flow and dynamic excitement. But this time, it was going to be flesh and machine. So everything was driven by fixed tempo. And it meant that it was particularly challenging for Larry because now he was not just following time in his headphones. He was listening to ingredients that would be there with the drums in the end. So there was a very fundamental difference that we were operating by. I remember some lovely things coming out of Hansa. There's a track called "You're So Cruel." Check out the groove on them, and that's one of the greats. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Berlin, for providing us with a great groove.
Right. Yeah.
There were searching times. We fiddled around with some chord sequences, and eventually we hit on the backbone of the song "One," right? And that really provided a lot of encouragement for everyone. We just went from there. We went back to Dublin a little bit, tail between the legs, because we didn't get quite as much as we had hoped to get, but that's life. But we got it in the end. It's kind of a masterpiece. I hadn't heard this record in a while. I put it on. I thought, whoa. Yeah. Rock and roll rhythm section and fabulously inventive tops.
Yeah. And you mentioned just a moment ago, kind of experimenting with some chord progressions and stuff, which leads nicely into this next question. There was a documentary that came out about the making of this record called From the Sky Down. And in that, the band reflected on a pivotal moment that it really got them going and led to arguably one of the biggest rock songs of all time. So I think we're going to take a listen here to a quote from The Edge and what he had to say about what happened after he hit on what he described, I guess, as a bit of an off-the-cuff chord progression when they were practicing the song that would eventually become Mysterious Ways. Or am I just going to read that?
Do you mind reading?
Okay, no problem. All right. So here's what The Edge had to say. I played these on acoustic guitar, and everybody was trying to decide if they were any good. And then Danny said, Edge, why don't you play those two ideas sequential? Just play one after another and see what happens. So I did, and everyone was like, that sounds really good. Let's try that in the big room. The Danny he's referring to, of course, is my guest here in the studio, legendary producer Daniel Lanois. So, Daniel, do you remember what happened next?
Well, once we got the chord sequence in order, then we were able to play a song, which always helps.
Right.
And then we just kept plowing through it, and eventually we got a take that everybody felt pretty good about. And then that's when it got interesting, because every overdub after that seemed to bring, more fruit to the situation, better harvest. There's a couple of guitar parts in there. There's a mantra part that runs through the entire song, and it kind of goes one down, down, one down, one down. I played that on Les Paul, and Eno doubled me in unison on his synthesizer. So it's a little something we laid down before the band comes in at 1 o'clock.
Right.
And that seemed to juice everybody up, because it had a really great guttural feeling to the part, almost like a John Lee Hooker part.
Right.
In the midst of a beautiful melodic song. So it provided us with a contrast that we love to hear in song. And everything we worked on, all the ideas seemed to bring some kind of results.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little later on, Bono said, Danny, would you play a little something on the intro? And I knocked out this little hammer-on. Hammer-on is a term for left hand on the guitar. So one. That one, which is kind of a little Jimi Hendrix trick that I learned when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently that stuck and
Yeah.
is what you hear on the intro, and then provided the Edge with a lot of encouragement to then come up with his own parts. And
Yeah, right.
Domino effect, I think it's called.
Right, yeah. Now that leads nicely into the next question I have here for you. And there's another quote here. There was an interview with Sound on Sound magazine. And you said that when you started working with U2 on this record, Achtung Baby, the band was looking to make more of a hard-hitting, live-sounding record. And there was a quote, you said you pushed the performance aspect very hard, often to the point of recklessness. And you went on to say that I think musical recklessness goes a long way on records, and you don't hear enough of it. So that's interesting to me, that idea of musical recklessness.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in the case of U2, we call it the engine room, which is not the ideas room. The ideas room is more the control room environment where, we got guitars and small amps and singing microphones, and we develop harmonies and so on. But in the engine room, you have to put on your heat-resistant suit. You're going, it's going to be like shattered metal and flying glass, and you can only communicate by signal,
Right.
because it's that loud. And this is where U2 really come to life, because they're a great rock band.
Right, yeah.
And that's the bedrock they stand on. As kids, that's what they were doing, pushing the envelope. So they have, for someone who's got the capacity to push the envelope, you might want to sort of water the plant a little bit and reconstitute that part of them. So that was part of my job, having an understanding that belongs to them, and to make sure that gets represented on a record. Once the arrangements are all worked out, then these guys can really deliver. So you want to make sure that you get the fundamental out of the engine room.
Right.
Once you've gotten the engine room version done, then you can go into the ideas room and add toppings and so on.
Right.
I think we did a really nice job of representing that part of the band, but having inventive tops.
Right. Now, moving ahead just a little bit, it's just last year Bono said that the band, that U2, had found themselves at what he described as a creative impasse, similar to the one that he had previously expressed that the band experienced to a certain extent before Achtung Baby. Do you think there's a point where, for a band or for any creative individual, that they can become creatively tapped? Do you think that happens?
Well, I've always looked at life in chapters. You know, for me, 7-year chapters, maybe 5-year chapters, and during a given chapter, there'll be a lot of excitement about a direction, discoveries being made, and so you've excitement really fuels you. So what you don't know fully yet is the thing that you want to know about, and that's what keeps you hungry. And when you reach a point of expertise, you know, maybe you've taken an idea to the mountaintop, then you see another mountain. Gee, we didn't even know this mountain existed. Now we're standing on the one, we see the others. So down to the valley, up again.
Right.
But I think that's just it's just part of evolution and what we go through as human beings. You know, we're always asking questions about what could be. So it's very much the case with U2, and so it doesn't surprise me that, you know, there would be a point of questioning and wondering what's around the next bend of the river. You know?
Well, that seems to be the key, huh? Just like a curiosity and a wonder about what else there may be. That seems to be the key to never getting to that point where you're tapped, to not limit one's vision and to wonder, well, you know, what's around the corner? If we head back down to the valley, what will we find? Earlier you were talking about, I mean, of course, you've been producing records for people going back into the 70s, but earlier you were talking about, you know, discovering some technology and on an iPad with like a DJ app. So, I mean, I guess that has to be part of it, just not saying, well, this is what I am and what I do, and then you do it until the well runs dry. It's leaving oneself open.
Well, it's a fine line, you know. It's a delicate balance, because you want to do what you do best, and you might be fascinated with something else, but maybe that shouldn't be the thing you should do. But you still have a responsibility to evolve, and so we always encourage evolution, of course, and to step into new territory. But you don't want to be a charlatan and suddenly think that you have to be doing choreography and hip hop, you know, if you're a folk musician, for example.
Right. Of course. Yeah, there is a line. Hey, we're talking with legendary producer and artist Daniel Lanois. Has been my guest here in the studio this week. He'll be inducted into the Canadian Music Industry Hall of Fame. Join us tomorrow when Daniel takes us behind the scenes for the making of what has been called Bob Dylan's comeback record. Daniel will be in the studio with me every day this week to share stories about some of his most memorable experiences as a producer. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.